welcome back. Welcome to Belgrade, Serbia. It is Michael here, and I am going to talk to you today about opportunities in Serbia, fittingly enough, since we are here for a little over a week. So Serbia is a really cool country. It's a place that is, for those of you who don't know, quite small. It's on the Balkan Peninsula. It is the Belgrade at least, is the former capital of ex-Yugoslavia. And it represents kind of the cultural center of it. So a lot of the music and things like this go in the halo of Belgrade, which is, kind of nice, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar, ex-Yugoslavia was basically Slovenia, Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, Bosnia, okay? And then you've got the cultural splash, I guess you would say, extends into Macedonia, it extends into Bulgaria, etc. Okay? So interesting place to come visit if you're ever looking. It's got very famous nightlife. The cost of living is quite low as far as European standards go. I guess you would say it's very cheap compared to Western Europe for most things. Things like taxis, things like cost of rent, things like cost of housing, food, etc. Shopping, like clothing, etc., tends to be a bit more expensive. You have import duties, etc. So you're usually better off to shop in Andorra or Italy or something, Paris, etc. for those things. But anyway, that gives you like a little bit of a context. Population-wise, there's about 7 million people, and so we're going to talk about what are the opportunities that you can find here. So let's talk about first some of the things that people might think at first might be an opportunity and are not typically good opportunities. So number one, would you want to start a company here? Almost certainly not. Okay. Generally speaking, Serbia is very bureaucratic. It's certainly not very efficient to do business, etc. And the taxes are not particularly low. So in that sense, setting up a company, you'd be far better off to set up a company in Hungary or in Bulgaria, nearby, Montenegro even, etc. Go to Cyprus, whatever, compared to Serbia. So generally, I would recommend not setting up a company in Serbia. The next thing some people sometimes come and ask me about is they say, hey, what about opening a bank account there? I see it doesn't have CRS. You can go and watch our video on CRS to see my opinions about that in general, because mostly I think that hiding from CRS is not a good idea. But that being said, even if that was your objective, it's going to be challenging to open up a bank account in Serbia as a foreigner, and it's generally not a good place to open up a bank account. The banking system is, you might call it a little bit behind. The government has had certain controls on it, which have been quite negative towards the country. So the country has unfortunately suffered from, I guess like you'd call repressive, not repressive in terms of like culture, but repressive economically forces, okay? So let's go and look at this historically. I mean, obviously it was communist, or maybe you didn't know, it was communist under Yugoslavia. So obviously that had an effect. You can see all of the former Soviet states, these former communist states, have typically been a little bit behind in terms of economic development to, let's say, the Western European countries, in particular, UK, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, etc., right? So, same principle applies here. But beyond that, it got worse, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate for the people in this area. But when ex-Yugoslavia broke up, there was civil war, basically from around 1992, 1991, 92, somewhere in there until, I don't know, around 1994, something in that range. There was civil war. And I mean, war is just horrible for an area and horrible for the people in that area. Like, you can say, all right, apologize. You can say, okay, people make money selling arms. Look, war is a horrible, especially civil war, is a horrible, horrible thing. And, I have personal friends, people who work for us, etc., who were driven out of their homes, who had to flee, etc. I was just at dinner the other night and heard some stories similar to this. Somebody from Croatia who was driven out at gunpoint and had to flee. We have friends and clients, all kinds of people, like very horrible situation. It's very disruptive, and then it results in sanctions, it results in destruction, all these things that hurt the welfare of the country and the people moving forward, right? Unfortunately, it got worse for Serbia, whereas Croatia Croatia became part of the EU. You had Slovenia became part of the EU. Montenegro broke off in 2006. But you had this whole thing where in 1999, there was, due to a bunch of ethnic tensions, etc., Belgrade ended up being bombed by the US for like 90 days straight or something like that. And I've talked to people who, they remember as a kid of 11 years old going to the bomb shelter and what that was like. So again, you can see the destructive force that has held back this part of the world and has been unfortunate for them, right? That environment combined with the culture, though, I think has created a drive in the people that is really wonderful. And that is like a drive for education and betterment. Okay, so what you see when you come to Serbia is a very educated populace. There is a very high percentage of people who are university educated with good degrees, right? Like good schools, good educations, challenging high standards, who, I don't know, you can look at the international benchmarks, but I don't think it reflects in that you'll see the people who go from this part of the world, say they're midway through high school, and they move to the US and they find it super easy, right? And then they fall behind and they have to go back. So you have a very educated populace. I find that if you are from a Western country, anyway, I can't speak from the perspective of, if you were somebody Asian, but, or, even Latin American or African, etc. But if you're from that perspective, then culturally there's a similarity. I mean, this was formerly under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, at least to an extent, going quite far back. And so there's similar cultural roots. And it means that when you hire people, there are a lot of similarities that make it easier to do business with people here than, let's say, say you're German and you're trying to do business with somebody in China, right? The cultures are quite different. And so you may have challenges understanding each other in terms of your styles, right? So the style is going to be, it'll be stylistically similar, it'll be culturally similar in terms of how you work together. And that can be very beneficial, okay? I noticed this especially beyond just kind of the working together is in terms of design, right? If I'm hiring a graphic designer or something like that, the design sense is something that is much more familiar to me, much more, it's just kind of like what we come to appreciate from, say I'm taking a very Western perspective, right? So if you, again, I mentioned this in another video, if you go to India, the sense of, they'll produce something and there's a chance, a good chance I would say, based on my experience, that you're gonna look at it and you're gonna be like, that is not at all like my idea of what I'm looking for, what I think looks good. There's exceptions to that, of course, but you're just gonna find it's easier to find those people who have, you're like, yeah, that looks good, this is like what I'm after, versus in some other part of the world. And so for that reason, I think there's a fantastic opportunity. Serbia is my favorite place to hire people, probably of anywhere. You're in a situation where there is, like I said, this educated workforce. The unemployment rate is quite high, unfortunately for them, but fortunately for you if you're able to hire them, because it means that there's more availability of people. Wages here are quite low. They're lower for sure than in, say, Bulgaria by probably about 30%. I mean, depending on whether you're hiring rural Bulgaria or Sofia, places like that. So wages are definitely lower, and that's mainly due to the fact that they're not a part of the European Union, right? So whereas people in Bulgaria can travel to Germany and work and get higher wages, people in Serbia have a much more difficult time doing that. So a lot of people do leave. They go on work and travel to the US, they go to Germany, they go to some of these other places. This is certainly the case, but it's harder for them to do that. And it's created an environment where you just have a lot of talented people in Serbia who are very educated, who are very diligent and hardworking, and their wages are, really below the market. So I just think about value, and the value for the money in terms of hiring people in Serbia is some of the best in the world. Some people may argue they like Ukraine. Obviously, there's some parts of Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, places like this, that some people also like, Russia. Some people like various parts of Latin America. I mean, there's lots of different places that you can hire people. but I find that value for the money is some of the best in the world in Serbia. Okay, so that's a thing that's worth noting. What are some other opportunities? Well, if you look at an investing perspective, it's a little more uncertain. So there have been some opportunities here in the real estate market, for example, where things have gone up. However, because they've gone up, we're in this kind of situation where it's like, all right, now the market here is it's not geographically constrained, so that's something that doesn't work in your favor. Although there are a lot of older buildings, and because of the nature of strata and how ownership works across, say, an apartment block, the ability to knock that down and build something new is very limited. And so that kind of creates an interesting dynamic. But there's a lot of space, at least, right? It is quite a corrupt country. So somebody once told me this: if you want to understand Serbia, just think they're a small Russia, So there's a lot of corruption, and that corruption, having those connections, plays a significant role in your ability to effectively do business and invest in that environment. There's also not a lot of controls, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, there have been cases where the same apartment was sold 3-4 times, right? So you have to be very careful. So are there opportunities? Yes, there's opportunities for the right person. Is this a great time in the market? Personally, I'm not investing here, and I think that it's not, if I kind of look at the macroeconomic, picture, it's not my choice place. I would rather invest in Montenegro, for example, than in Serbia at this point in time. I feel like we're talking about from a real estate standpoint. On the flip side, if we're to look at maybe investing in startups, then it's potentially kind of an interesting ecosystem, right? Because what do you have? You have an area that is deprived of capital to a large extent. It doesn't have the same access to capital that, say, being in Estonia or Germany or UK or Singapore, etc., have the same access to capital yet. Like on the flip side, you have low costs, right? The cost of labor is quite low, and the access to talent. It's not a large talent pool, right? 7 million people. It's not an enormous pool of people, but if you have a core team, you can get some very highly educated, driven people. So I had dinner with some people the other day. It was very, very interesting. They have a brain scanning startup that they're working on. Very, very cool stuff, right? And so in that sense, I think there are some opportunities. I think if you can find the right deal where you can invest in an entrepreneur in Serbia, I think there's an opportunity to do this kind of multiples arbitrage, right? Where you can say, okay, I can buy in here and I can get in for a much lower price, and my upside can actually be, comparable or greater, right? At least greater in terms of from where you got in, right? You can, but I then have the ability potentially in the future to transplant that into an environment where there's a larger capital market, and I can go and take advantage of higher multiples. So those are some things I think are particularly interesting in Serbia. I wouldn't typically suggest much. It's not really a place to come shopping. It's not really a place to come and start a business or something like that. But in terms of hiring people, fantastic. In terms of investing in early stage companies, might be interesting. Those would be kind of the main things that I would look at Serbia for at this point in time. So anyway, I hope that's interesting to you. I hope it's helpful. If it is, click like for the video, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to comment, tell us what it is you'd like to see. I'm happy to make more videos for you about kind of these topics, but whatever, tell us what you're interested in. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.